Should the state require the appointment of a control board for Lawrence? Why or why not? And that is Mr. Lyon's question first.
In my opinion, what's happening in the city of Lawrence is something that definitely needs immediate control. I believe that that the solution is probably to put a control board in, but it might even be to put them into receivership. If you're running an organization and you only have so many dollars and you have to make cuts, and the other person in charge of making those cuts are the cuts that you make to your safety and your fire and your police, it doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense if you're the CEO of an organization and you have certain dollars to cut, that you start cutting fire and police. What's that doing to the rest of the communities around the city of Lawrence? So I believe we should definitely put a control board in place, but I believe that we also have to look seriously as whether or not we put Lawrence into receivership.
Indeed, I think there's a very important principle of controlling your own locality. And the reason that's such an important principle normally is that people know best for their own communities what's important to them. If Governor Duvall, Patrick, wastes your money, you don't always know the various ways it's wasted. Ditto for President Obama. But if your mayor wastes money, you see him driving down the street in that nice new car, right? You see what corruption is in your own locality. And I think for that reason, it's important to let people have their own control. That said, Lawrence, I think, has forfeited its right to self-control by demanding money from the state. And I think once you demand a bailout of that kind, you have no right to make your own decisions. And I think that's what people found so vulgar about things like the GM CEOs and the banks going off to Capitol Hill to demand bailouts and then turning around and giving themselves bonuses. I mean, I'm fine with people giving themselves bonuses, but once you demand someone else's money for it, you have absolutely no right to make your own decisions on how it's spent.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that the prevailing wage should be repealed, and what do you forecast the annual statewide savings to be? And that is Mr. Thorlin's question first.
Certainly. I think the prevailing wage laws are fundamentally flawed. I think the idea that we have to pay the prevailing union wage on a given construction project is flat out insane. I mean, if we want the state to save money, or heck, even to operate in a modicum of efficiency, we can't say right off the bat, okay, you save as much money as possible, but you have to make sure every employee makes a certain amount. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. I think this is one of those common sense issues where most people kind of come out in the same place. It really doesn't make sense. If you want to give people handouts, you have to be explicit about it. I mean, it's a totally different issue to say, are there some people we think deserve breaks from the state? Fine, we can have that discussion. But we shouldn't give it backdoor, and we shouldn't give it through government contracts. Once you start doing things like that, that is just leading straight down the road to corruption. And actually, if you want to know one of the big reasons the Roman Empire fell apart, it was internal corruption of that sort, where having pull, and unions largely have pull for these sorts of things. That's why it's the prevailing union wage, and not the prevailing wage that John Thorlin would be willing to accept to do a job or something like that. That's when you start getting that slide toward corruption and toward a lack of respect for government, when you see them pulling favors like this for people. As for forecasting the annual savings, I'm not Nostradamus and I'm not a prophet, so I don't honestly know exactly what the annual savings will be. It'll depend on the construction projects that are ongoing at that time. But I can tell you it'll be a heck of a lot more than if we keep the prevailing wage laws.
How many people in this room, given the choice to pay $30,000 for the same roof versus $9,000, would make the decision to spend the $30,000? Everybody in here would make the decision to spend the $9,000. I would say that I'm correct about that. In the UMass project, that they're trying to build, under the prevailing wage law, the cost is going to be $750 million. If we open that up to free enterprise, that savings is going to be $100 million. So what is the prevailing law doing to the people of Massachusetts? It's costing us money. Instead of getting more projects done and putting more people to work, we're getting less projects done and putting less people to work. So yes, we have to fundamentally change how we bid our construction projects. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the word free enterprise. It's not free enterprise with all kinds of regulations and interference from government. And when we get back to the understanding of free enterprise, Every citizen in Massachusetts is going to be better off. As far as the overall cost, I agree with John. I couldn't guess.
Okay. That brings us almost to the end of this period of our program, so I would ask the candidates to make their 1.5-minute closing statements and in the reverse order of what you did before, and Mr. Lyons, you get to go first.
As I said at the beginning, the reason that I got into this race is because I think we need to fundamentally change the direction of government. When the state legislature and our incumbent legislator decided to increase the meals tax, increase the sales tax, and add a tax to alcohol, it was a clear sign to me as a business owner that we were once again going in the wrong direction. We cannot continue down the path where folks run for office for their own private enrichment versus public service. And too many times, take a look at Beacon Hill, too many times, too many folks have run for office for their own private enrichment versus public service. That's why we have to eliminate pensions for all elected officials. We have to get it back that it's about public service. We have to drive down the cost of government, and we have to start there. And we have to fundamentally change the way we tax our citizens. So I'm running to go up there for one reason. I believe that it is time, with all due respect to my Democratic friends, to pick a fight with the Democrats and move this state in a new direction. The one-party system has gone on too long. Clearly, what is going on Beacon Hill now isn't working. We need to change the direction of our government, and I'm asking you to vote for me on September 14th. Thank you very much.
I think if there's one important lesson I've learned as a Republican growing up in Massachusetts and then spending a lot of time at Harvard, it's that you have to be diplomatic with people sometimes, but you have to stay with your principles. I also learned that very well. I dated a girl for a few years who was both a Yankees fan and a Democrat. So things got very tense. But sticking to your principles means being pleasant with people, being affable, but making sure they know where you stand. And I want to reiterate right now, I'm perfectly happy with all the Democratic colleagues. Most of my friends are Democrats, just given the demographics of Massachusetts. But my principle is firm. I think the government has to have a strict, limited set of things that it does, and it needs to do those well. And we should have common sense restraints in place to ensure that it does that. I think fundamentally, the purpose of government is to ensure that everyone has the right to pursue their own happiness. It is not to give handouts to people. It is not to ensure that unions are happy. It is not to ensure that every single citizen can demand a certain standard of living from their neighbors. There are plenty of great programs, and I'll tell you, I was a 7th and 8th grade teacher for Lawrence children for a little while. I taught math and English. And the most important lesson I always told them was take responsibility for yourself. There are lots of great organizations in the world that will help you, including the one I worked at, which was helping to teach students who were promising. I think those organizations can do the job more effectively than government, and I think in order to be effective, we have to have limits. Thank you.
Thank you. I would thank both of you.